Hello, I'm Rosemary Hanna. Welcome to the series, The Bahamas Then and Now, that deals with our history, heritage, arts, and culture. Those people who were involved and continue to be involved in guarding our heritage. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Our guest today is Bishop Gilbert Arthur Thompson, retired suffragan bishop of the Anglican Diocese of the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos Islands. Welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
Tell us a little bit about growing up on Farm Road, or Market Street as the proper name was.
Well, it was called Farm Road because the market, which was on Bay Street, extended to Wolf Road. Mm-hmm. Beyond Wolf Road, persons still farmed. And so they brought their farm products onto Market Street to take to the market. Mm-hmm. So there is a utilization concept about the market, mm-hmm. the farm, and the mm-hmm. road. Mm-hmm. Now, growing up in the Bahamas in the late 30s, 40s, 50s was an experience whereby you were a much smaller country. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so because of that, you knew more of the persons in the environment, in the area. So mm-hmm. there was a closer togetherness because you knew your neighbors. You didn't ride in cars, which were very scanty at that time. Mm-hmm. So you either walked or you rode a bicycle. Walking meant that as you joined from Wolf Road to the market, you stopped and talked mm-hmm. with the neighbors. Yes. You hailed the neighbors. So good morning, good afternoon. Children in the area also went to the same schools. Everybody went to the government school mm-hmm. until he got to the age around 12 or 13, when high schools were then opened. Again, earlier in the 40s, there would have only been the government high school. Mm-hmm. And then later on, St. John's, St. Augustine, and some other schools came into being. So most of the children in the area you knew mm-hmm. because you had been to school with them. Mm-hmm. And they remained, to a very large extent, your lifetime friends.
Mm-hmm. So what were the people who influenced you most when you were growing up as a child?
Well, my parents mm-hmm. and the relatives of my parents, like uncles and aunts and cousins, would always come to our house, which was somewhat central, mm-hmm. and we had a very special cousin who was called Reverend Jerome Hutchinson. He would come almost every afternoon and sit on the porch. Mm-hmm. And while he sat on the porch, he would become engaged in conversation with different people, from Sir Alvin Brennan, the Honorable A.F. Adley, people from Hatchet Bay, and persons passing generally. Mm-hmm. So he would always be engaged in conversation. My brother and I were allowed to listen into these conversations. Then we had uncles like mm-hmm. Dr. Brown and Dr. Hutchinson, Dr. Esquin Hutchinson, mm-hmm. and again there was a very close knit among my mother and her relatives. And then on the other hand, there's a close knit between my grandmother and the Rumkey clan. So all of these merging factors impacted upon us. And you listen and you were allowed to ask questions. you were pointed to books, you heard stories, and a wide variety of anecdotes, historical happenings, because they would talk about the war. The war was, World War II was then raging. So debates would be whether Hitler could beat England, and when would the Americans come in? When was Pearl Harbor? You know, that's 1941. All of these things we talk about that time. Then there was the Marini murder case.
Tell us more about the other influences that encouraged you and your brother to become priests. And I do know that your heritage is in the Baptist faith, and that how did you become an Anglican?
Well, my grandmother was christened at St. Christopher's Church in Rumkey. It happened that she married a Baptist minister, but he died very early. And after he died, she adopted a niece called May Strawn, who was the sister of the Canon Dudley Strawn. And she grew up with us, and she took us to church with her.
Okay.
So you have the Baptist environment, but you also have a very strong Anglican influence. So we went to church with May, and she took us wherever she went. Most persons felt that she was our mother.
Okay.
Because our mother was very much in the background at the time.
Was the church very important in your development? How did you decide that you wanted to be a priest?
Well, remember, you have the Baptist background and a lot of ministers. Then you have St. Agnes there. You have Father Pyfrom, to whom our grandmother took us and said, now these two boys can become priests.
Oh.
All right? And then Father Cooper, who was very nurturing, because he had a dream of encouraging all the black boys in St. Agnes who had education, who had some moral stability and character, to become priests, to train to become priests. So you had Father Strawn, you had Bishop Gomez, then you had Willie and myself, then you had Father Bonamy. These would have been the earlier ones who would set the pace for those who would come after. He was very supportive in that regard. But he had a far vision as to what the diocese needed. At the time, he was the only black priest in Nassau.
Yes, yes.
And so he had this vision whereby eventually the diocese would have more indigenous clergy.
I know that you trained at Codrington College, and who were your compatriots at the time while you were studying at Codrington?
Well, at Codrington, we had Willie my first year, then we had Father Strawn my first year, and then we had Canon Roach my first year, and then we would have David, we have Archbishop Gomez also my first year. You had David Kemp, white Bahamian. He died early.
Okay.
And then later on, Father Max Sweeney and Father Bonamy came. And then we also had Bernard Cooper, the son of Archdeacon Coleman Cooper. So they were all there with me, one time or the other.
Well, I know that you were also an educator and that you were posted at different times to different family islands. Where were you posted, and where did you teach?
Now, what happened was I went to Andros to open a school at the age of 19, right? To be a headmaster. It happened that the furniture didn't come early or on time, so I taught along with Richard Dean and Charles Ramin at the Mine Grove Key Public School for a year. Now, I was very reluctant to go to the family islands because the family islands those days, no electricity, no running water, very basic, no sporting activities. And in Nassau I was playing cricket and running track and doing all sorts of different things. So what happened was I had to read all the books that I should have read at high school. I read at Andros, you know, like all the Dickens and Quentin Durward's and the Miltons and the different books. So by force, I had to become engaged in reading. And since then I've never stopped, you know, or like so Walter Scott and all those, the classics. I had to read the classics in order to entertain myself. So Andrews was very, very, very helpful, good for me.
In that regard.
We had the church there, All Saints Mangrove Key. At that time, Father Butler was there. Father Butler had also served as a deacon at St. Agnes before he went to Mangrove Key.
Having been a teacher and a priest over the years, what are the differences between the way children were brought up then and what's happening now? Very briefly.
Well, remember, when we were young, you too, you were young, Mommy was still home all day.
Yes.
And what happened is, Mommy had to go to work. So it meant that the attention that she could give to the children was lessened. Mommy also had to go to night classes because in many instances the basic education was limited. So in order to maintain the high standards demanded in the workplace, she had to go back to school. Also, there is the lessening of the extended family.
Yes.
Whereby when Mommy wasn't there, Grammy or Auntie or Uncle or somebody was there to fill that gap. That is no longer the case.
What you're saying, Bishop Thompson, it really affects all of us. And we'll talk about that a little bit more after the break.
All right.
We'll be right back.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now. This episode is brought to you by the Private Trust Corporation Limited, Dungalik Studios, and Easy Light Native Charcoal.
This is the Bahamas. 700 islands, reefs, and keys, sporting a distinct history and heritage all its own. This is New Providence, most populated, industrialized island at the center of the archipelago. Home of Nassau, the capital city, seat of parliament, location of political and social revolution, site from which our nation declared its independence. And this is Over the Hill, a community, a series of neighborhoods in what was then considered Southwest New Providence. Settled by slaves, having served as the midwife of national deliverance. Over the Hill, a breeding ground of nation builders, constructing trait by trait, precept upon precept, character-toting, culture-shaping leaders. Over the Hill, where independence was born, where the naval string of Bahamianization is buried, where Junkanoo got polished. Over the Hill, where sense and sensitivity were kneaded into the dough of children's souls, where people reverently genuflected to the image of God in every man. Over the Hill. East Street, Market Street, Blue Hill Road, Baintown, Grantstown, Anderson Street, Augusta Street, DeFort Hill, McPherson Street, Over the Hill, McCullough Corner, Hay Street, Glinton Square, where? Mason's Addition, Jail Alley, Lewis Street, Over the Hill. The Coakleys, the Smiths, the Johnsons, the Blydens, the DeStoops, the Grants and the Coopers, the McPhersons and the Pindlings, the Allens and the Winders. Over the Hill. The Hannahs, the Bostricks, the Burnsides, the Bethels, the Walkers, the Enuses, and the Thompsons, the McCartneys and the Gibsons. Over the Hill. What if we went back and dug into the soil of our glorious past? And what if we studied the roots and found the patterns of Bahamian unity and success and progress, and superimposed those on the social ills of Lil Nassau, the social ills of the Bahamas in general? What would happen? What would happen if we really understood where we came from? Our heritage is not ghetto. Our language is not profanity. Our resolution is not violence. We are Bahamians, kings and queens, gentlemen and ladies, athletes and warriors in every sphere, geniuses and priests, artists and leaders, and much of it started over the hill.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now.
Welcome back. Our guest today is Bishop Gilbert Arthur Thompson. Bishop, before we went to the break, we were talking about the way children were brought up when we were youth. What were the sort of activities that you took part in and that I took part in that were uplifting for children?
I think our life was centered around the church and the school. At St. Agnes, we always had a play almost 2 times a year. Yes. You had the concerts, you had the youth clubs, you had the boys brigade, you had, as I said, the gardenia club we had, and you intermixed with your contemporaries. But other than that, in Farm Road, all the boys intermix, and our house was like the center. Our shop was the center because they would come in the shop at night and we would talk about all sorts of things. Baseball was something new because Jackie Robinson had just broken into the big leagues. The boys sometimes go as a group to see the white softball league at Garfunkel Field. When you talk, generally, you move, generally, as I said, your education, exposure, that stage was about the same. And so, I mean, some went to St. Agnes, some went to Transfiguration, some went to other places. But the church was a part of your bringing up. And your parents had dreams for you.
Yes.
They set standards for you. You were told to maximize your ability. You were told not to steal what belonged to somebody else, what was their own possession. You were taught to be polite. You didn't pass older people without saying good morning, good afternoon. Those were things that were in our yard, an adjacent yard called Brown Yard. But the church and the school and the other institutions were the influencing factors.
I know that when I was at St. Agnes growing up there, I was involved in the AYPA and the girls with Sister Tekla Mary. And I also remember too that we used to have debates between the various AYPA groups from the various churches. You don't hear about that sort of thing now. And I think that a lot of our children, they seem to want to be spoon-fed with everything. What's your opinion on that?
Well, remember, they are still keen, but they have so many distractions now. That computer has become a means whereby they can, as it were, almost educate themselves if they're willing, but it doesn't encourage the intermixing that was there when that instrument was not available. So even in homes, in the evenings, you would sit on the porch and tell old stories.
That's right, yes.
Jack and the Devil.
Babuki and Barabi.
Bucky and Marabi. And we had a raconteur in called Euchre over in Brown Yard. He had some pornographic old stories too, you know, which he wouldn't talk when grown-ups were around. But all of these things. Then you sat on the porch, you played Biddy Biddy Hold Fast My Gold Ring. And then you used to play hide and seek. You remember that?
Yes,
Hoop,
yes.
hoop, hoop. You say hoop, 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 you know that. But all these things were a means of entertaining us. And then the movies were quite attractive, and historically speaking, you read about Drake, you saw Errol Flynn, you saw Robin Hood. All of these things were impacted, but the church and the schools were the main factors there.
How did the people in your neighborhood interact with each other, and how did they resolve their differences?
Well, remember, my grandmother and the neighbor, they always had, you had to make sure the stones in your wall didn't go in other places' wall. But they had a means of working it out. They had a means of talking it over, sometimes with harsh words, sometimes with soft words. But there was that togetherness. And there was the 10 Commandments that helped to keep people together. The churches, the neighborhood was strong like Hay Street. Hay Street produced all sorts of intellectual people. Our Governor General, Mr. Turnquest, had about 2 doctors, about 2 lawyers, coming right down to Williams's, Dolores, who married your brother, and then you had the MP for the neighborhood was there, Bert Cambridge. Then you had the Lord Moores, you had the Lightburns, you had the Conliffs, you had the Thompsons, you had the Johnsons, who had a World War II hero in their midst. And you had married to the Mitchells, Major Granger, and so on. All of these people were used as models for us. So Basil Johnson's picture would have been up in Western Senior School, only black picture there. And you know, you were, these people were there as your models. Father Cooper was our model.
Right. Yes.
All right. Dr. Walker, but they were our models.
So you had people that you could look up to.
People that you knew that you could look up to, all right?
That's right.
Yeah. And Miss Curry, Tisha Curry, who used to have a tea party for St. Agnes at her home, and all like Chippy and the boys and those. And don't forget the Chipmunks were not too far from us.
That's right, just down the road. That's right. And then you had Miss Newbold further east on Hay Street.
Hay Street East, who had a piano and an organ in the house, but she could play.
And her sons were musicians too, weren't they?
Well, her son was the organist for St. Francis Cathedral before he migrated to the States.
Yes, I remember.
And all the boys, Dudley and Lloyd and Blinky and Junior and Ollie Mae and Plunky and all of them.
There's some strange nicknames,
but you see, they were your friends.
Yes.
You when you went out, if you were going with them, you got the okay. If not, you didn't get the okay.
Tell me, what do you think can be done to stem the tide of violence that we are experiencing here in the country now?
You see, Rosemary, it's the home. You see, when you allow the home not to be the educating factor in the community, and when the boys don't have some men around, you see, there was always an uncle around, always a cousin around him, even daddy, there was a daddy around too. So when you extract or detach that firmness of the home, the what I call the extended home, when the children don't have that security, then they sometimes rebel because they feel as if they're not loved and appreciated as they ought to be. And so we have to go back to letting people know that, you must have some moral guidance about how you have children.
Yes.
So you don't bring children into the world that you can't raise, you can't love, and you cannot protect, you can't project dreams. All our parents had dreams for us.
Yes, they certainly did.
And they told you what you expect. If your report card wasn't good, you might get a good cut up. I mean, this business sparing the rod, they didn't believe in that. They believed in bringing them up.
They certainly didn't.
As Dickens said, by hand. Literally by hand, all right? But those things, another thing. I was talking, lecturing at COB to a class, and the girl, and I was speaking about the past, she got angry. She said, why did you all allow all these things to get away from us? You robbed us. You robbed us. Because we felt that some parents felt that, parents brought us up too hard. We're going to relax now. We're going to give them things that we don't have. Sometimes we spoil the children.
Yes. And then the emphasis often is put on the wrong things, like, clothing and things like that, instead of educating your children. Today.
Yeah, and giving them some principles.
Yes.
Some strong principles, but there are so many distractions now. But as I said, the greatest deficiency is the homes are not as strong as they used to be, with parents who not only told you what to do, but live lives that showed
by
you,
example,
modeled
by example,
for you
yes,
what they expect of you.
So, as a priest, what do you think the church can do to encourage more of this?
The church can only do so much, I mean, it's like the old people say, you can take the horse to the water. You can't make it drink. We've been preaching, abstinence and things of that nature, but we regard as old-fashioned. Now the sociologists are saying the same thing.
They finally arrived at that
same conclusion. They're saying abstinence.
Yeah.
They say abstinence is also a means of contraception. They say that now. They weren't saying it before. The 60s were saying, if it feels good, you do it.
You do it. Oh boy.
That was the philosophy now. We're saying we understand that you have to have some principles, some guidelines, and you have to tell your children that they have to learn to abstain and have some principles. Don't bring children to the world you can't take care of. Otherwise, they affect the whole society.
And I guess we're reaping the rewards of that now.
We are, because there's some of the young boys rebelling and they say, but I had no daddy, I had no this. I'm angry against society.
Well, Bishop Thompson, I'm afraid our time has run out, and we've got so much more that we could say about this situation in the Bahamas.
Yeah, I thank you for having me on, but remember, all of us together have to deal with the negative factors in society. But also remember there are lots of positive things happening to you.
Certainly.
So don't, my brother always used to say the cup is half full, not half empty. There are lots of positive things which are happening. Our children becoming Rhodes scholars, and all sorts of things. Most of them in university now. They're doing well, but then there's also that negative factor. And speaking about the negative factor, let's also talk about
the positive.
The positive. Yes. What we have achieved.
Thank you for being with us, Bishop Thompson.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
And you want me to come back again to finish off? you know how to conduct me. All right.
Thank you very much.